The Royal Nepal Airlines plane started moving towards the runway at Kathmandu Airport at exactly 4 o'clock. I was sitting on the seat next to the window. At that time, the truth had happened. Waves of fear were running through my body. My eyes went from one corner of the airport building to another. Every moment the thought passed that the police jeep would appear. The pilot will stop the plane on the taxiway, and the police will arrest me. Even though such stages had passed on me many times before. But after playing the game of life and death continuously for 3.5 years, I was now mentally broken, and now, the matter had come to the point that on one side freedom, my country, my home and family, and on the other side the third degree, agonizing death with the torture, was only a few minutes between them. Just a few minutes. Fate always gave me 3 aces while playing the game of life. But not every hand gets 3 aces. So now, this was the last bet. A wave of fear gave me a jolt if it turned upside down. I closed my eyes and left everything to the Almighty, whose power have no limits. Man can do without it. There is a limit to human effort, and after that, he is in need of and seeking the pleasure of the Almighty. I was overwhelmed with joy. Suddenly, the soft voice of the air hostess brought me out of my slumber, and I was allowed to open the belts. The plane was soaring, leaving the snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas below. Mount Everest was clearly visible to the right. Most of the passengers of the plane had come towards the windows on this side of the plane to see this peak. But my mind was going to the past. 3.5 years, 1,158 days. And innumerable events passed by in these 1,158 days passed through my mind, like a fast-paced film. The air hostesses said that now we are passing over Bangladesh, and the delta of Karnataka River is below us. It was divided into dozens of feet and extended for miles, and the oblique rays of the evening sun set afire in dozens of branches of Karnataka River. Perhaps because of such a scene, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman had to call Hamar Desh, Tamar Desh, Sunar Desh to separate East Pakistan and make Bangladesh. But it was just a reflection, a poor look, which was taken as the truth, and the largest Islamic state in the world was torn apart. At that time, the years of the creation of Bangladesh had already passed. But the word Bangladesh for East Pakistan did not fit anywhere in my mind, and it is still the case for many. I refer to this area as former East Pakistan, just as blood ties do not break due to distance and separation. In the same way, by calling this land the former East Pakistan, one feels a relationship of belonging. The journey to Bangkok was 6 hours. The mind jumped into the past, and where it stopped was the fateful day of December 16, 1971. I was a stunts public relations officer at GGV Tarbela Joint Venture, the company that built the Tarbela Dam. The salary was reasonable, the company provided many facilities, and life was very comfortable. Our war with India was going on. The media was making big claims of success. The Polish resolution to end the war, which had the support of the world powers, was torn apart by the head of our delegation. It was being felt that in a few days India would kneel down and surrender in exchange for a ceasefire. General Niazi these days has been pushed to the east, and the Indian tank was the head of the command. On my body, you can enter through that. Amused by these happy claims, the news of the BBC struck like lightning that on December 16, 1971, the Pakistani forces had signed an agreement to surrender, and General Niazi had invited his old colleague, General Arora, to perform the ceremony. Be sure that at first no one is willing to believe the news that Muslims will surrender to Hindus. Muhammad bin Qasim defeating Raja Dahir with a few thousand soldiers, Mahmud Ghaznavi's 17 attacks, in which the horsemen defeated the millions of armies of the kings from all over India every time, and reached Somnath and lost many gems to Somnath. To be known in history as an idol broker instead of an idol seller, the bravest caste of the Hindus. The highest race of the Rajputs, Suraj Jinsi, who married Emperor Akbar from Dhaka, while according to Hindu Dharma, they were even by the shadow of a Muslim, they become unclean. Ahmad Shah Abdali is the king of defeating Chand repeatedly and leaving him to wash his feet every time. The nation that will leave the streets of Medina and conquer Africa on the one hand, and go to Amin and Albania in Europe, and on the other hand conquer the states of Iran, Afghanistan, India, and Eastern Russia, and raise the flags of their rule up to Malaysia and Indonesia. The nation in which brave generals like Hazrat Khalid bin Walid, Tariq bin Ziyad, Musa bin Nasir, Nuruddin Zanji, Salahuddin Ayyubi, Muhammad bin Qasim, Mahmud Ghaznavi, and Tipu Sultan were born, whose names non-Muslim rulers used to cower in fear. The largest number of Muslim forces in the largest empire of this nation was forced to surrender in front of which had been ruled by Muslims for thousands of years. In the continuation of 1,400 years of success in the history of Muslims, it was this failure, and such a big failure, that broke Pakistan in two, or even unjustifiably. The reason for this was the character of the traitors, as always. Every time the Muslims faced digestion, it was simply because of the role of traitors. And in 1971, the innocent people of East Pakistan were given something by the traitorous leaders to consider the two West Pakistanis as their greatest enemies. And then after everything was hung up, when they came to their senses, everyone knows the fate of the traitorous leaders. I have come a long way from the original topic, but one of my goals in writing my story is to tell our younger generation where distance has brought us. Let's not go so far that it is not possible to return. Instead of fighting with each other, we have to not only get out of the grip of these tyrannical powers, but also destroy them. And in this, we flow. Not without Muslims. They are taking us away from Islam with their every tactic, just like Spain, where Muslims ruled for 800 years. There is not a single Spanish Muslim today. In the same way, the non-Muslim forces want the left, from all over the world, become the same. The name and mark of Muslims should be erased. At the time of Holy Prophet, there were hundreds of idols were in Mecca. There were two big ones called Manat and Lat, and they were considered to be the leaders of other idols. Paganism had spread from India to Hijaz and Mecca. The number 100 is called Sum in Persian, same in Arabic, and 100 in English. Sum is a Sanskrit word. An idol called Manat was in the Kaaba, 100 times more powerful according to Hindus than Somanat. The idol of Somnath was in a special room of the temple, and the idol of Somnath was made of metal, and the walls was made of magnets, for that this idol was floating in the air. And due to the magnetic attraction of this room, it was seen in the air. For this reason, he was called the chief of idols. Hinduism, which considers power as its religion, Somnath was their god, and the 100th part of it was in the Kaaba named Manat. The sins committed by Mahmud Ghaznavi. Remembering Somnath, he atones for these sins. On Mahmud Ghaznavi's return, he took with him the door of Somnath, which was present in Kabul's museum till 1948. At the request of the Indian Prime Minister Nehru, the then King of Kabul, Zahir Shah, gave back the door to India and started the construction of the Somnath temple, which was much publicized. The first Prime Minister of Pakistan, Liaquat Ali Khan Shahid, appealed to the Pakistani nation in the Conference of Yes. Reconstruction began. Every child born on this day should be named Mahmud. If it is you, then the soil is big now. Fertile is Sadi. I come to my story. All over the world, only Muslims are called to be martial warriors and nations. The greatest empire of the same martial race. It was no small shock that the largest number of Muslim soldiers in the world surrendered to the Hindus. The impact of this shock was so great that I left Tarbala without any destination in my car, at a very high speed, in a state of madness. When I regained my senses, I had come further than Jhelum. At that time, my only wish was that car crash and I should die. Who cares about this? Thought that despair is a sin. Instead of wasting my life for no purpose, why don't I pour it on the interest of the country and nation? Since the general manager of the company and I used to sit in the same office, we had the opportunity to meet him several times a day. Probably on the 20th or 21st of December, they were in my room. I came and said that if I were not you, I would have regretted to be the blessed batter or Pakistan to be rich and defeated. I replied to him that 34 years of ups and downs in the history of nations does not have a real or decisive effect. Years ago, we defeated this India. During the war, its representative said in the United Nations that we are ready for a ceasefire right now. Immediately after the armistice, after the signing of the Tashkent Agreement, the Indian Prime Minister died there, unable to bear the joy of avoiding his complete defeat. In the 1965 war, the Indian government moved its capital from Delhi to Allahabad, 240 miles away from the Pakistani border. Killed, they were only 14 miles away from the Indian border without a declaration of war, while their commander-in-chief at that time had announced that he would drink a small peg in the September Gymkhana Lahore. In Indian-occupied Kashmir, at the distance of Chamjadrian, Lahore, and 8 miles away from Sialkot, our flock at the cantonment was Al-Barar Ha, 11 miles into the Indian border at Panchkator, and we captured their largest town, Kemkaran. In this town, there were 4 cinemas. It was destroyed by air and air. One of our banana aviators, we have 300 of the Indian Air Force. Mahmud Alam destroyed 6 Indian aircraft in 45 seconds at Sargoda's air attack aircraft 88F, which is less than Indian fighter jets. Our entire nation was one. Like the 4 fingers of the hand and the thumb together become a fist. We were not separate at that time, but the whole nation was united. Was Indians are so afraid of losing Pakistanis that Shaheed Millat Liaquat Ali Khan had only shown a punch to India that India would kill its troops by killing them. But unfortunately, now our nation was divided due to the confusion of political leaders, which resulted in this defeat. I said to the general manager that you should congratulate me on the birth of the child, because this child has come with the promise of one. In other words, I used to give my heart a lot, but I was not able to control it. Finally, in the second decade of January 72, I resigned from the job. Gave after serving 1 month's notice period. I left my family in my native village in Rawalpindi and went to a highly sensitive institution of Pakistan Army and volunteered myself to do any kind of dangerous work. The officials of the organization were at first surprised that a civilian would be volunteering in this desperate time. For about 20 days, I had various types of encroaches. During this time, he explored my entire past through his sources. When they were completely satisfied, so they wanted to threaten me with the difficulties I would face, the danger of my life, and extreme violence in case of being caught, because they wanted me to go back if my intention to work for this institution was just a temporary jinn. But by my steadfastness, when they saw that if I am not a victim of temporary jinns, but am willing to make the biggest sacrifice for my country, then within a month of the first meeting, I will be asked regularly. I was automatically inducted into the institute and started my training within a week. A period of 6 months was fixed for my training, which I completed in 4 months and a few days. Briefly, I can state that tremendous physical difficulties, judo, and static and mobile surveillance methods were taught. And if the cities, the provinces themselves, everything that can be expected from an educated Indian was instilled in my mind in such a way that I became a complete Indian citizen. This was followed by torture tolerance training and physical and mental torture to see if any degree of torture, if you get stuck, how to avoid them. And the most important thing is that during this time, I was completely made an Indian citizen. As such, methods, rituals, apart from customs, language, and political and social life, all the information related to Indian forces was also memorized. Their trains, bus stands, I can bear it. Then to operate wirelessly, methods of obtaining information on attacks on cantonments and military bases, so that in every aspect, I should have prepared to perform duties. My first job in life was blending tea in a well-known tea company in Chittagong, erstwhile East Pakistan. Me in India. They came in handy for providing invisibility. I could visit every cantonment as an open tea trader. I was a resident of New Nagpara in Bombay. It was even arranged that if someone asked for me from the address I had given, he would know that Vinod Chopra lived here during my stay, and does tea business. The last part of the training was to get the required information from the Pakistani cantonment, and that was my test, in which I not only got the required information but also found out some sensitive secrets and gave them to my teachers. So I was selected as the group leader. My group, I had 4 colleagues who were specialists in different tasks in the Pakistan Army. We were the only ones allowed to do this: a specialist in wireless interception plotting, a risk taker during the mission. Suppose this small army of 5 of us was fully prepared for our mission, and we were to depart on our mission at 24 hours notice. One more thing, all 5 of us were matched for stoves only after the first barter bait was completed. No one had detailed information about each other. They were to monitor and subdue or kill the enemy if they got stuck somewhere. Because it was a complete group, as the group leader, he was my every command. They were bound to obey, and they were not allowed to do any work by their own decision. We all had to live separately, and they couldn't communicate without me. I had to know their whereabouts, but they were not supposed to know my whereabouts, to contact my sympathizers in India. It is very important for such a campaign that if someone is captured by the enemy, even if he does not commit violence, he cannot tell about his comrades. Thank you so much for watching our video. This is a true story of Abu Shuja Abu Wakr. If you liked the video, please like it, subscribe our channel and press the bell icon to not miss any updates of this story. Comment below to let us know what you think about our story. We will meet you again with other episodes. Till then, have a good care of yourself.